the title of this kind of says it all. The Bird Conservation Network, in cooperation with various agencies, has been surveying the breeding birds of the Chicago metro area for 21 years now. And we recently completed a fairly comprehensive statistical analysis of how are the breeding birds doing. And I will talk a little bit about that, and I certainly invite questions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but if you think you have a question, put it in the chat if you can, and we'll see if we can address some of your questions. Nat, next slide. This is the hot link that I put into the chat. If you want to, you can access the entire bird trends analysis, birds of concern lists, and so forth from that link in the chat, and it's published elsewhere. Go ahead with the next one, Nat. These are the people that did the work. BCN hired a biologist with a specialty in statistics, Valerie Steen, and she did the actual statistical analysis of the data. And the oversight was provided by various people in the Bird Conservation Network Steering Committee, a group of science advisors, and the data itself has been reviewed by 3 different people who are listed here. And the website and the web development of that site is largely thanks to Eric Secker. And if you get into the website, you'll find it's very easy to use. You can hover over to get explanations of the terms. It's very accessible, so we urge you to take a look at it at your own time. Go ahead, Nat. Some people wonder, Chicago Wilderness was an organization founded probably 25 or more years ago, which to some extent disappeared for a while. It has been reinvigorated, but it's the Chicago Wilderness region is 500,000 acres, 850 square miles, embedded in one of the largest metro areas in North America. So when we talk about the Chicago Wilderness region, that's what we're talking about. Next. The trends that you're going to see and I'm going to talk about are aimed at discussing the breeding birds in various habitats, specifically grassland, shrubland, woodland, wetland habitats, and then a little bit of work, not very much, frankly, on urban birds, let's say alley birds, ring-billed gulls that nest on the roofs of buildings, etc. That's not really an important part of the analysis. Go ahead, Matt. The other thing that's contained in this statistical analysis is an updated birds of concern. And that is a takeaway from the National Fish and Wildlife Birds of Concern classification. And the birds of concern levels that are contained in the data relative to the species, level 1, I've never quite understood this. Level 1 is the highest priority. Level 3 is the lowest. I would have argued for the other, but nobody asked me, I guess. So maybe that's just as well. But in any case, level 1 birds, there are high regional threats to their population, and they need generally strong conservation action to reverse or stabilize what are long-term declines in their population. Level 2 is slightly less than level 1 in terms of the declines. So, but they nonetheless need management. And level 3 is a fairly specific classification. It's more based on regional populations. And again, monitoring and land management are important tools to make sure they're still doing okay. Go ahead, Ned. So what is the birds of concern list used for? Around here, certainly in the Chicago area, the various forest preserve districts, the Chicago Park District, some of the land conservancies, the Morton Arboretum, various places use the data about bird populations and how they're doing, or how the habitats that they live in are doing, breeding in. And it is a tool that they can use to make management decisions about how to manage those habitats for the best outcome for the birds. It's probably an inappropriate repetition, but you might say canaries are it's like canaries in the coal mine. Birds are very good indicators of habitat quality. If they're there, they're stable or increasing in population in natural areas. That's a pretty strong indicator that we're doing the right thing by those natural areas. One example, for example, here in DuPage is in native woodlands in the DuPage Forest Preserve District, understory plantings after restoration, removing invasives and so forth is very important. Unfortunately, we have too many deer in DuPage, so there's a fairly aggressive deer culling program to make sure that the deer which love native understory plants are not too numerous. Very difficult problem because there are many people who, Walt Disney made Bambi, so I guess I would say that there is a certain amount of pressure on the Forest Preserve District to not manage deer. Go ahead, Ned. So what does this all mean really in terms of effort? It's 21 years of data. There's more than 200,000 individual observations. That's in effect individual points, which were maybe at a point you might observe and record if you're a monitor anywhere from a half a dozen to 10, maybe not much more than 10, although it's possible. But in general, there are 200,000 point counts, if you want to think of it that way. And in those point counts, the total number of birds that were counted is over 472,000. And more than 190 breeding species have been identified as breeding here in the Chicago region via the BCN monitoring program. There are over 2,300 points within 300 different sites scattered across the region, 250 or more monitors, over 18,000 hours in the field. And when you factor in travel time, some people travel long distances to monitor. The amount of man years of time is really staggering. So it's a big effort. And go ahead, Nat. DuPage is part of this. For those of you who monitor in DuPage, is about 20 to 25% of the overall effort. And the DuPage efforts in monitoring actually predate the beginning of the BCN program, but not much of that earlier data is included in the I don't know how many people in the group tonight are monitors, but thanks to you all. Without the volunteers, this program could have never been carried out. And again, I go back to that 200 to 300 people annually are out at dawn monitoring and reporting their data every year during the breeding season. So on to the next one. I always like this as a comparison. Many of us are familiar with the North American Breeding Bird Survey. The BBS conducts a bit over 3,000 24.5-mile routes across the lower 48 every year. And you stop every half mile, so it's a 50-point route, if you will. That means that the Breeding Bird Survey monitors 160,000 points yearly. If we scaled up the Breeding Bird Survey to what BCN is doing, they'd have to run 29,000 routes, almost 10 times what's being done today. So that gives you some idea of the density of the effort. Onward, please. How the routes and points are distributed, they're distributed primarily by a habitat type. And excuse me, this is a little hard, it's a little cluttered, but the dark green line represents woodland habitats. The light green line represents grassland habitats. And the orange line at the far left of each one of these years represents shrubland habitats. As you can see, about half of the effort is concentrated on woodland birds. Grassland birds are second, and shrubland birds are third. The weakest areas of coverage are in natural areas are the wetland birds, as you can see consistently across this yearly chart. Go ahead to the next. So what about woodlands, for example? In total, there are more than 100,000 individual observations. And as I just mentioned, that accounts to about 50% of all the data. There are more than 1,200 points within 160 sites. And we've identified 66 woodland bird species that are regular breeders within the Chicago region. And of those 66, we have statistically reliable population trends data for 54 of those 66 species. And we have 12 of those species simply don't nest often enough that we can develop really useful statistical trends on their population. On to the next, Natalie. So in the general sense of our woodland 66 species, 22 are showing moderate and in some cases strong increases in population over the past 21 years. Some of these 22 are perhaps examples of bird species that are extending their range northward, perhaps due to climate change or other factors. Maybe they're reoccupying territories that they were extirpated from. 17 of the species among the 66 are basically stable in population. Unfortunately, 15 species show statistically significant declines since 1999. And again, there are those 12 species where the numbers are so low that we really can't develop an accurate statistical sense of how they're doing. Go ahead, Nick. when I mentioned range expansion, for example, these two species, and boy, they're kind of nice species to have more of, summer tanager and pileated woodpecker, have clearly their population, their numbers, and their breeding activity has grown pretty substantially since this process began. So in the case of the pileated and the summer tanager, it's difficult to say whether that's what the cause is, but the effect is certainly something that I think most of us can enjoy, both just from seeing these very exciting and photogenic birds, but also it represents either they're reoccupying habitat where they once were and they disappeared from, or they're moving in to habitat that, particularly in the case of the summer tanager, perhaps it's an example of a bird that's moving north. Next, please. That went backwards. There we go. Okay, first quiz of the day. Birds look very similar. The one on the left goes pizza, and the one on the right goes Fitzbue. Can you tell them apart by just looking at them? I'm not asking anybody to answer. I'm just asking a somewhat rhetorical question. The bird on the left is an Acadian flycatcher, and it is one of the species that is now more breeding regularly here in the Chicago area. And 21 years ago, and further back than that, it was absent. So this again may be a case of a more southern breeding species moving north. The species on the right is a least flycatcher. And its population, breeding population, according to the statistics, is declining. And there may be a simple explanation for that. It's not necessarily because of the habitat or the quality. We're right at the southern edge of the breeding population of least flycatchers. So it could be, again, as I don't want to overplay climate change, but it could be that this bird is extending its range northward and maybe shrinking in population at the southern limit of its range. So it's an interesting hypothesis. Jerry just posted a comment. That's true. It was in Palis, but Jerry, I would only say that the numbers suggest that it's much more widespread than it was 20 years ago. So remember, this is a statistical analysis, not just an observation. On to the next. Here's an example of a species that is showing a decline. It's not clear, it may have stabilized, but the numbers, if you go back 50 years, certainly, the numbers are substantially lower for red-headed woodpeckers than they were 50 years ago. I made a talk to the oak ecosystem recovery team a couple of weeks ago on this subject about woodland birds. And the question was asked, why are red-headed woodpeckers not as abundant as they once were? And I made a somewhat of a snide remark, and I partially mean it, partially do not. But I said, maybe you're cutting down too many dead trees. And that's not fair, obviously, but it is true that they prefer dead or dying trees for nesting cavities, and we may have fewer opportunities for them to nest, and or competition from starlings may have reduced their population. Go ahead, Nat. And what about this one? The ovenbird. I alluded to it earlier. This bird is in decline in our woodlands. It's less, statistically much less common than it was 20 years ago. And that is very likely due to the difficulty in maintaining an understory. This is a ground nester, and there may be other aspects of that problem. Maybe the population of squirrels, raccoons, possums, etc., may be larger. So ground nesters, especially if there's a lack of cover, are very vulnerable. So ovenbirds are definitely present in smaller numbers as a breeding population than they were as recently as 20 years ago. Go ahead, Nat. Grassland birds, there are 32 identifiable species that nest in our grasslands, and 8 of them are showing increases. And again, there may be a range expansion issue with a couple of them. 15 of them seem to be holding their own. Unfortunately, 4 species are showing statistically significant declines. And again, there are 5 species that are present historically, even historically, in such small numbers that you can't really derive an accurate trend. Go ahead, Nat. One of the new guys in grasslands is sandhill cranes. And sandhill cranes in general are much more abundant breeders in Illinois, certainly, than they were 20 years ago. And the other one is dick thistles. These are just a couple of the new guys on the block. I'm depending on my memory, which may be faulty. I think they were more abundant, then they declined, and they may be coming back. And that may be as much as anything related to what's happening in South America in terms of treatment of the grasslands and so forth. But in any case, dick thistles are more common today in our grasslands than they were 20 years ago in our grassland edges. Go ahead. One of the big questions is regarding these 4 species. Grasshopper sparrow, bobolink, Savannah sparrow, and surprisingly, brown-headed cowbird. They're all declining in our grasslands. You can argue that cowbirds are not really grassland birds, but they certainly parasitize grassland birds, along with shrubland birds and any birds they can dump their eggs into, I guess. But I'm not sure anybody really understands the reason for this, but it is a real decline. And Joe Suchecki, for example, might be able to share a thought or two on that. On to the next. And just as a reminder to everybody, these classifications aren't hard and fast rules. There are any number of species that are more generalists in breeding. They breed in more than one habitat type. And when you look at the table of bird species under each of the habitat types, you're going to see repetition. You're going to see red-headed woodpeckers, for example, appear in a couple of different habitat types. But it is interesting if you see them declining. I'm not suggesting that's happening, but let's say you've got a species that pops up in both habitats as a breeder, and it declines in one and increases in the other. Maybe that's showing some tendency to change its behavior or its choice of breeding habitat. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Go ahead, Nat. Shrubland birds, 37 species. Again, remember the overlap because this is really, there is overlap between shrubland and woodland edge birds. 7 species of the 37 in the database are showing increases. One seems to be definitely extending its breeding range north, and 20 of the species are not, seem to be stable. And then there are 4 species which apparently are decreasing in population. Go ahead, Nat. I think it's fair to say that the likelihood of seeing a mockingbird in DuPage County is much greater today than it was 20 years ago. This is a bird that is moving north. It's a different example, but Carolina wren might be another example of a species that was moving north, except that maybe that harsh winter weather we had over 2 or 3 weeks last February might have, shall we, well, I guess I can't say it any other way. It might have killed a bunch of the Carolina wrens that were attempting to overwinter here in northern Illinois. But mockingbirds are definitely more common today than they were at the beginning of this program. Onward and upward, Nat. So again, so cowbirds are also declining in shrublands as well as in grasslands. I'm not sure what that means, and I'm not sure any of the biologists could give you, but perhaps maybe it's because some of the species they parasitize are declining. That's certainly a possibility. For example, the willow flycatcher, the left-hand bird, or I'm not sure they parasitize American goldfinches. Redstarts, American goldfinches, willow flycatchers are all showing evidence of decline. And although we don't have a lot of data on white-eyed vireos, the data we do have suggests that there's a moderate possibility that they are also declining. Go ahead. So what don't we know? We really lack data on more comprehensive data on marshes and wetlands within the region. So I guess we've got to, as monitors, we've got to get our feet wet more often. Everybody likes to go in bird and woodlands and enjoy wood thrushes and whatever singing from the trees. Marshes are less desirable for wandering around, that's for sure. And we need more data because some of these species that are less common, the more data we collect, the more it is likely we'll be able to determine how they're doing. And the more years we do this, so this is not the end of this program, it's going to continue. And hopefully it's going to grow because we can recruit more monitors and cover more of natural areas. Go ahead. So just by way of closing, thank you to all that are monitors. Thank you for listening. And basically, I'm happy to answer any questions. Eric, if you, I'm going to stop sharing, or Natalie, stop sharing. Let Eric, if he can, bring up the screen for the website.
Okay. All right, thank you, Bob, for that summary of some of the major trends. The chat's been pretty active with a lot of interesting comments about places you can see some of the birds Bob was talking about, and some other thoughts about monitoring. Pat Anderson mentioned
Eric, you want to talk about this a little bit?
I know Chicago has been adding a lot of wetlands, and if they're getting, or wetlands habitat is being restored throughout, especially the south side of Chicago, And it sounds like it's going to be more monitoring there too. And then Jerry mentions a need for marsh restoration programs in DuPage. I don't know much about that. I know McKee Marsh didn't have any water in it a month or so ago, but that might have changed by now.
Can I ask a question?
Oh,
Yeah, I
please.
think Bob and I are going to open up to questions if anyone has questions.
Yeah, I was curious. So with the declining species, is there anything specifically being done to target their habitats?
I guess the answer would be that the land managers take this information and try to adjust their management if they can, put together cause and effect. Eric's brought up the sparrow species, and I think it's difficult in the case of grasslands to, I think the managers are still searching for the best way of managing grassland habitat so as to encourage a diverse group of species. Joe might address this too, or Eric, but what it comes down to is that what we think is generally good for grassland birds, there may be, you might say, sub-habitats within the broader classification that they might be better for grasshopper sparrows. And there are some obvious things. Some grassland birds like shortgrass, others like taller grass with more forbs and so forth. So it's really a way of communicating to the land managers so they can make judgments about what they're doing. Eric, you got a thought on that?
Oh, this is Joe Suchecki, and for DuPage County and specifically for Springbrook, I mean, the site there is, we've been managing for the grassland birds. And in fact, my data for Springbrook is actually showing an increase in bobolinks, probably increase in Savannah sparrows, a very, strong decrease in grasshopper sparrows. But it all depends on what the specific habitats are there. And, we have, fields that are very good habitat for Savannah sparrows, which generally likes very short, dense grass, I think I'm not sure what's happening with the grasshopper sparrow. They just seem to have disappeared from many places around. But I work very cooperatively with Forest Preserve District staff, and we do a lot of management for these birds, and you can see where they are managed. The fields are managed well, and that we do have increasing populations. So that's an example of that can spread to other places as well. So, but some of the, some of the things that still has to be worked out is, some of the decline. There's an issue with traditional restoration to native species with tall grasses that, frankly, I think the data have shown pretty well that the grassland birds actually don't like that with, big blue stem and stuff. So I know, DuPage has switched over to shorter grasses, and we're doing a lot of mowing that seems to help. So it's just I think the region is looking at all that information.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, kind of seconding Joe's comments. Savannah and grasshopper sparrow are both kind of short grass dominant species. So my kind of thought has been that they were actually a little more opportunistic at using some degraded habitats Example, even grasshopper sparrow, when my sister was working for DuPage Forest Preserve District, she was able to drive up on the hill at Mallard Lake landfill, and there's actually a big population still there. Talk about a habitat, it's not really managed. But because they mowed it, it created that short grass habitat. So I think it's possible a couple of those species are actually declining as some of these grasslands are restored. And so as Joe talked about now, DuPage, for example, seeing that and thinking about, okay, how can we address this now and create some more short grass habitat? Bobolink, I think, is a mix. That one, I know they're very insect dependent for feeding their young. So, that's something that we're seeing across the whole country is declines in insects. So that could be an issue. And then bobolinks face a lot of threats in their wintering grounds also in South America and other places. And so, that's a case where land managers here may only be able to do so much to help them if they're declining in their wintering grounds before they even get here. And also grasshopper and savanna, especially grasshopper tends to like some more of the forb heavy areas. So as we get grasses taking over some of the grasslands, I tend to see less of them as well.
The other thing that may be happening in sort of as a broader answer to that question, Lauren, is that larger grassland habitats, or for that matter, larger woodland habitats, probably accommodate higher breeding success. We can save prairie fragments, for example, and that may be great for the plants and even to some extent the insects that live there. But the birds that might nest there, if the fragment is too small, they become extremely vulnerable to predation by small mammals and so forth. So some of those things are related to the size and a large grassland is probably going to support more bird diversity as well as plant insect diversity, et cetera. And it points out the need to connect up, enlarge if possible, that type of habitat. That's why Springbrook, for example, is such an important place. Or Medewan, for example, which is in this database as well.
Looks like John had a question.
Henslow Sparrow, if you would.
I do have a question. Wayne Lampa, in one of his reports, noted that DuPage County, at the time of settlement, roughly 1840, was approximately 50% marsh and 50% grassland. And we're talking about woodland birds. I've come to the conclusion that in our forest preserves, at least with pileated woodpeckers, the habitat is slowly changing. Most of the preserves I go into have, a fair number of native trees, but not many. I'm just wondering if any of that factors in or is considered in some of the conclusions that are being reached.
Well, I can address that one, John. The Chicagoland Trees Initiative, the Oak Ecosystem Recovery, those folks are very much focused on, and it's a big subject, and we certainly don't have time to discuss it tonight, but the composition of woodlands has changed, and it is the hope and plan of those groups to reverse that change to some extent. Basically, not just for the breeding birds, but also perhaps equally importantly for the migratory birds that use the woodlands, the treetops. And I don't remember who mentioned it, but we're talking about the decline in insect populations. The huge number of species of native moths that use oak, and at times with, let's say, ill-advised management practices. Well, they didn't know any better at the time, but the management practices didn't just wipe out gypsy moths, for example. It wiped out all the moths. So some of those factors are going to take a long time to work their way out. Certainly the decline in insect populations overall is impacting the nightjars and the flycatchers and so forth. I asked Eric to bring up Henslow's just to point out that we're doing some things right in our grasslands, because they are, at the start of this program, they were very uncommon. They've actually become fairly common across the region as breeders. So why? I'm not sure we precisely know, but we must be doing something right.
Yeah, and I was going to say, John, kind of segueing on that, the birds of concern list, that's largely based off of Partners in Flight, which is a more national organization that puts out lists, and they rank every species as far as its priority. And that's divided out by regions throughout the country based on habitat types. And so in our area, for example, it's not just prioritizing birds that are declining the most, but also prioritizing birds that we're important for. So for example, Chicagoland, like say the Arboretum, maybe it's the edge of a Pileate's range. Maybe it's not as important for Pileate woodpeckers as the regions where they were more traditionally breeding. But Henslow's, for example, even though it's increasing, our region, which kind of includes Iowa and Illinois and some little areas in the Midwest, holds maybe like 40% of the entire population of Henslow's sparrows. And so, this is a species where we in Chicagoland can make a really dramatic difference for this species for the entire country. So even though they're doing well here, it's still a high priority species. Some of you may remember when they were on the threatened list, still even have since been taken off of that. So even though that's changed, they're still considered a very high priority for us, because traditionally when there was a lot of grassland, this would have been an area where they'd be very prominent, and not a lot of other places that are.
Yeah, I think that it's this program, the most important thing individually and collectively we can do is make sure that we have an active system to continue to monitor. And because the land managers do pay attention to what we tell them, the data that we give them, and they make decisions based on that data, because the birds really are the canaries in the coal mine for a lot of natural land management in our region. And this program has been very successful. Somebody asked, Diane asked in the chat whether we're seeking monitors. We're seeking monitors anytime anybody wants to volunteer, but there'll be probably early spring of 2022, there'll be another appeal. DuPage Forest Preserve District has an active monitoring program. I happen to know that there are 4 or 5 sites within DuPage where the natural resources folks would love to find monitors for those sites to add to the database. So this is, in one sense, I'd love to be sitting here in another 21 years seeing how we're doing, because the more data we have, the more we'll understand what we're doing and whether it's working or not. There is, I don't want to go away with a bad sense, there is a lot of evidence that within our region that land management practices have been adjusted, they've been refined, and we're probably doing a better job of managing our natural lands than we did, let's say, 20 years ago. I'm not criticizing anybody. We just know more. And part of what we know more about is how the birds are reacting. And you can't undervalue this effort. It's really a strong effort. Take a look at the website as Eric is scrolling on it. You'll see a lot of trends, and you'll see a lot of margin of error, which tells you an awful lot about whether or not the statistical trend, for example, stop right there, Eric, black-billed cuckoo, we show a modest decline, but the error margin is plus or minus 4.3%. The decline is -1. So that's uncertain enough that we can't really say that species is declining. It says we don't have enough data to reliably say it's either increasing, stable, or declining. Any more questions?
See, Natalie commented how complex and difficult it is to try to manage and restore habitat, to take into account all these different sorts of species and their habitat preferences, and what we can try to glean about them in our limited ability, even though we're spending many hours studying these things. It's an amazingly complicated thing, but it's good we have some idea thanks to this data.
Just to emphasize the, I guess I'll say how other people view this effort. We were invited to the Partners in Flight International Conference, which is taking actually place next week. We were invited to talk about this program at that conference because it is a long-term success in terms of continuity, the numbers of people involved, the dedication, and the outcome. So we're, in a very real sense, a model that's going to be picked up probably by other metro areas. The big advantage that we have, because we're in a metro area, we've got a lot of birders. I guess if I was going to say, we have what do we have right now? 400 birders in DuPage Birding Club, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Steve?
That's about right, yes. Mm-hmm.
If 100 of those 400, I don't know how many are monitors right now, it'd be an interesting question. But if 100 were monitors, I'm guessing we would be able to cover even more natural areas here in DuPage than we're covering now. So think about that for next spring. And I think that's a good place to stop.
Okay. Any other questions or interest? I know this is going to be, like I said, it's going to be presented again in other presentations. The BCN is just now working on, well, one, they're going to be revamping their website, but also they're going to be working with how to present this data to the public in general, the conservation community, the land managers community, the scientific community. So there's going to be a lot of work going on next year to try to get this message out and start to get the ball rolling when it comes to land management, as well as just general, public awareness and input about these birds. So looking forward to that next year. I guess with that, we can wind things down. Thank you, everyone, first of all, for attending this important meeting for the club. And thanks to Bob and Eric especially for presenting to us today. And Natalie's muted, but she's trying to say something interesting. Natalie?
Okay, here we go. Okay, I just wanted to say thanks, Bob and Eric. There was a lot of complex data and information, and you made it sound so relevant to this area and the management of the parks and the land. I think it's a really impressive organization and provides a huge amount of information for people working in that area. So thank you for speaking tonight, both of you.
Well, remember, Natalie, the DuPage Birding Club was one of the essentially founding members, organizations that helped the BCN start up.
I didn't know that.
We're not Johnny-come-latelys in this. We were there.
Yeah, there's about 20 organizations that are contributing to BCN as far as membership dues and things, but there's lots of individuals from all over our area.
And the DuPage County Forest Preserve District was really a pioneer for doing point count bird monitoring too. I think they've been doing it since the 80s at least. So
Yeah.
there were some big pioneers with that program who helped kind of develop what the BCN survey turned into as well.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'd like to make a comment. I put it in the chat, but people should be interested in looking at the restoration being done at Blackwell. It was an important restoration to restore the river to the flow for the creatures that are in the river that haven't been there for a while. But the savanna has been restored too, and the understory is going to be coming up. So everyone should be going through that area, taking a look. We've seen unusual birds and we've seen cranes landing in the area. But I think it's one of the ones that's going to be influential in that area to bring birds back in. Maybe the shorebirds will take a little bit to come back in, but they've made some small ponds there. It's an effort that's going to take years of review, but it looks good right now.
We did have
Jerry,
go ahead.
Quickly, you made a point early in this about the DuPage Forest Preserve District has not done a heck of a lot for wetland, AKA shorebird habitat. And that's really something that maybe, shall we say, the club as a group and or BCN should encourage, because that is an area that is suffered by a degradation throughout the county. And, we could talk for another 2 hours about the importance of natural areas for migratory birds, and much of the same thing we say for the breeding birds can be true for the migratory birds. If we don't manage it or provide it, they don't have any place to go. So I think your point on that one was well taken.
Yeah, and it was my focus was McKee Marsh, which actually should be under restoration. It's deteriorated to the point where it either dries out or floods out, and it's a site where all kinds of sparrows were. Virginia rails are not appearing as often as they have. Soras are still there. But we do the monitoring every year. I go and walk through the marshes, and sometimes I come across a coyote where there should be a Virginia rail. So it's an interesting place, but they need constant regard. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Bob, we had a question come in from Jennifer about how to help the BCN and other efforts if you're not yet qualified to be a monitor, if maybe your birding by ear is not quite where it needs to be or whatever. Do you have any other suggestions?
Well, probably the simplest thing to do would be to get together with an existing monitor. If there's enough interest, for example, here within the club, we could easily organize a fairly useful and comprehensive training session for birding by ear. And I would point out that there are now apps available that allow you to record songs and identify birds um, using your phone, a phone app, and they're pretty reliable. They're probably more reliable than the photo apps that are out there. So I don't think there is as much of a gap between not knowing the songs as there used to be. I think that you can fill that gap. And I know I would, and other people would happily, we could put on a workshop for people who are uncomfortable with birding by ear, and also talk a little bit about the apps that are available for recording and identifying those recordings. It's done. It's being done now.
Hey, it's
Something-
Diane here. I just want to mention that the YouTube education channel has several videos out there on birding by ear. Joe Suchecki, I think was the leader of those videos, but that's a good place to start.
Right, yeah, exactly. Sorry, I didn't mention that, Diana. You're right.
And there's also opportunities behind the scenes at BCN to help too. Because there's some activism about policy that goes on at BCN. There's just helping move things along, communication between the monitors, communication with land managers. There are probably other ways to help as well. Leadership roles that can be taken and stuff. So while you're working on your ID skills. Is there any way to, well, I guess if there's interest, I mean, people can email DuPage Birding Club at gmail.com if they're interested in more training. There will be announcements annually in the drummings about BCN recruiting, so to speak. So that's another chance to contact the club and see if there's a group of people that want to get together. And I don't know, maybe Bob wouldn't mind if you contacted him as well. I don't know. But
No, I'm happy to, anybody who is interested, recognize that monitoring within DuPage, within the DuPage Forest Preserve districts, BCN and the district work hand in hand on that. So, and some of you may remember, I talked a little bit about that last spring. There were several sites, for example, within the district where monitors are needed. So we can put people together with locations, we can provide training or resources. But, you know, I just feel like the technology is advanced, that birding by ear or learning how to bird by ear is not as the skill as it once was perceived to be.
yeah, we had a video of our spring presentation by John, had a section on the BCN that Bob also presented to us. And I'm putting the link for that in the chat too. That's that video. So at about the 12-minute mark, Bob talks about Bird Conservation Network for more background. So that's a good video too. That's one on our channel.
Well, maybe the simplest thing to do is put something in drummings about it.
Oh yeah, well we do that. We do that.
The person to contact at the DuPage Forest Reserve is Cindy Hedges.
Yep.
She's in charge of the monitor. She knows which areas still need monitors, because I think when we looked at it last time, there were 4+ areas that were not being monitored.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
there were actually
that's
6.
another source. And since we we're in charge of the monitors at the Arboretum, we may be looking in the next year for a monitor or two to replace some that have retired or are not monitoring right now. There might be an area opened. That's all I'm going to say, but I'll get in contact with the club because we'd rather have some club member come in, and then you'll go through the process to become a volunteer at the Arboretum. And with that, you get a pass to get in. So it's a pretty nice benefit. And sometimes you can do night owl monitoring, which is a benefit at the Arboretum.
That'd be fun.
I believe we'll have a write-up about this in the "in case you missed it" section of the drumming. And we can put in some links. And Jerry, if you do send us an email or something, we can throw in some extra information about that too.
Yeah, we'll be reviewing it and seeing what the needs are.
Yeah.
But, you know, we think that there might be an opening coming up within the next year.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that the club will try to keep on the radar. We don't feature it every month, obviously, but we do feature it once or twice a year at least. And also, luckily, we have presentations about it this year. So it's been a good year for BCN publicity. So, okay. Anything else on anyone's mind, BCN related, while Bob is still here? And Eric and plenty of other people?
I think they're tired of listening to us.
Yeah. But they could listen all night, but we might have to adjourn for the moment, but we'll linger here a few more minutes if people do want to chat or ask questions or anything. So thank you all for attending again. And
Thank you, Bob and Eric. It was very
see you guys in winter birding as well as January meeting, I hope. So.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.
So.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Thanks, Eric.
Yes, thank you very much.